Hello, hello, hello. Good to see you. You get fairy dust, I get fairy dust, little Amelie gets fairy dust, and our little doe gets fairy dust. Um, as a reminder, the reason you have to have fairy dust and the reason I need it is because doing your advanced personal growth work is really fucking hard. Trying to individuate, trying to become a whole person, trying to be yourself in this crazy world is hard. And so we need a little something, like give us a little something. And so for me, that something is fairy dust. Um, the other thing about fairy dust is that I find um, when I do my advanced personal growth work, when I individuate, when I heal, when I can get myself out of emotional flashbacks and complexes, my life truly becomes magical. I can't believe I get to live in a time where I don't hate myself, when I'm really nice to myself, where I really get to spoil myself. And I believe in it so much I got a tattoo with a wand on it. So yeah, so just in case you don't know. Now you know. Okay, today we're going to talk about we're reading the Pete Walker's CPTSD from Surviving to Thriving book, and I'm on page 25, and this is called Shrinking the Critic. It's really important to understand that one of the hallmarks of childhood trauma is that you think it's you. You think you're the mistake. You think that you're lazy, that you're flighty, that you're always late, that you're, um, irritable, that you're annoying, that you overshare, or that you overthink, and that you're bad and you're wrong, and all of that. And it's actually the trauma within you that has convinced you to make it your identity. And it's completely false. And it's really a big piece of work to start to separate that this is not who you are. This is not your identity. This is trauma, textbook childhood trauma acting out, playing itself out in an unhealed way. And okay, that's fine. All we got to do is heal it. So I'm on page 25, and I'm going to read, and this is the subheading called Shrinking the Critic. And I'm going to read because Pete Walker's words are perfection, and then I'll expand on the idea. But we're going to talk about why we feel like a mistake, why childhood trauma um, makes us think that we're bad or wrong or whatever. Okay, so he says early abuse and abandonment force the child to merge his identity with the superego. Okay, so from Psych 101, Freud 101, there's three states of the ego. One is the superego, that is the one that knows all the rules and knows what's right and knows what's wrong, and it's black or it's white, or it's like it's so it's like it's a bitch. Like it's really mean, and it's like slapping the hand at all times. And then we have the ego. The ego is, and I'm not talking about the ego the way we use ego, like, oh, that person has a big ego. I'm stating like Freud's version of the ego, which is what I view as like my whole self, like my individuated, this is Elizabeth, who I am in all of myself, and how I identify myself and what my identity is. And then there's the id, which is the little part, the silly part, the part that has a wand sometimes, and or who wants what they want. I want it all, and I want it now. And so what we have to do to be a healthy functioning adult is we have to have a healthy ego state and not live in the superego or the id, because that's not going to go well for our life. And what happens is, so it's like if we're always like, I want it now, I want it, like that's not a person that you want to be in a relationship with. Like we get to be that sometimes. And then also the superego, it serves us. It's like the part of the superego is all the things that we were told not to do, like don't run a red light or don't stick your hand in an electrical socket. Like that's superego. Like we need to know these things. Like we want to have it. So, but what happens is, okay, so now you know. So superego, ego, and id. And what he's, and so a child is just like walking id, right? So we're just a walking id, and then we learn like that's not going to be okay in this environment. Like I'm going to have to like shut shit down. And how do I do that? By listening and by watching and learning about what gets rewarded and what gets punished. And so let me read again. So early abuse and abandonment forces the child to merge his identity with the superego, the part of the child's brain that learns the rules of his caretakers in order to gain and maintain acceptance. And so what that means is that we kind of lose ourself, we lose the magic of the id I mean I see the id as two things. It's like the magical child, but also like I want this and no, and like terrible twos or whatever. And then again, the super ego is like, hey, don't run that red light. Like that's not going to have a good consequence. But the super ego is also like, you're a piece of shit. And so like that's the part that we don't want. And so what happens is the child kind of has to give up their sense of self. And this happens automatically. Like the child just knows to do it because survival and safety trumps being ourself and getting to be a kid in the world. And so we sacrifice the id and the ego and we live in the super ego. But what we forget is that it's not who we are. We're actually more of a expanded human being, but in order to survive, we have to fuse. So the ego fuses itself to the superego, and the id fuses itself to the superego as much as possible. And um, and then we forget that we did that. And we forget that that happened to us, or we don't know until we come across a YouTube video that says, hey, this isn't you. Like this is a result of any kind of childhood trauma. And so here we have like we're fused with the superego, like whatever the rules are, like I got to be accepted, I got to please, I gotta work hard, I got to do whatever I need to do to fit into this family. And then he says, however, because acceptance is impossible in the CPTSD engendered family, the superego gets stuck working overtime to achieve the impossible. Because here's the bad news is like, it can't be pleased. Like, even if we figure out and how to be perfect and how to do it, a dysfunctional family, that's still not going to be enough. It's not going to fill the void of the dysfunctional family. Um, so what we do is we perseverate, this is quoting him again, on finding a formula to win over the parents. The child eventually embraces perfectionism as a strategy to make her parents less dangerous and more engaging. Makes sense. Her hope is that if she becomes smart, helpful, pretty, flawless enough, her parents will finally care for her. And you may not have like specific memories of this stuff happening to you, but if you have all the symptoms and a way, if you're new to this, especially like a way to kind of a way to say it and that doesn't really get your super ego triggered, is to say, did shit go down or not? Do I have these symptoms or not? And if you do, then you get to use these tools too. And then maybe at some point you can come to terms with what actually happened, but you don't have to heal. You don't have to think that your parents are bad people or your grandparents are bad or what your school was bad or whatever. You don't have to do that in order to heal. But if you do feel that way or know that that happened to you, I'm really, really sorry. And I see you. Okay. So sadly, continued failure at winning their regard first forces her to conclude that she is fatally flawed. She is loveless, not because of her mistakes, but because she is a mistake. She can only see what is wrong and missing in her. So self-criticism then runs nonstop in a desperate attempt to avoid rejection-inducing mistakes. See how his language is so right on the money. And so we become the survivor, this is important. The survivor is imprisoned by a jailer who will accept nothing but perfection. He is chauffeured by a hysterical driver who sees nothing but danger at every turn of the road. And so the point of this is that if we can just start to, instead of saying, I'm stupid, I'm dumb, I'm worthless, we can just start saying, like, my brain is telling me that I'm worthless. My brain is telling me that I'm nothing. My brain is telling me I'm a mistake. My brain is telling me I have to be perfect or nothing. Like my brain, or Byron Katie will say, like, my thinking is telling me this. My thinking is telling me that. And that can just create a space. And that this is all the same thing I'm saying. So my thinking is saying this, my brain is saying this, my internalized trauma voice is saying this, my inner saboteur is saying this, he calls it the inner critic is saying this, my superego is saying this. So whatever you want to, whatever you, and also just another an aside is that whatever language resonates the most with you is the one that you want to use. Like for me, inner critic isn't it. I like, inner saboteur is kind of a shorthand for it, but for me, like it's fine for me to use that. I get it. And some people name it something else, like they give it like a name. Sometimes people name it, like Mary is saying this to me or whatever, like they'll give it a name, or they'll give it like Ursula, they'll give it a character's name or something like that. The important part isn't what you call it. The important part is that you start to delineate it, that it is different from who you actually are. Your brain, you have learned how to do this over time, over time, over time. And in internal family systems, we call that somebody who has CPTSD, somebody who has childhood trauma, he says it's fused with the superego and internal family systems. We would call that I'm blended. So when we're blended with a part, we're really identifying, and we think it's us, but it's not us. It's not the whole of who we are. It is a part of us, but it's not actually who we are. And until we discover that, shit, I have trauma and there's a way out of my misery and my self-hatred, that a way to start doing that is to say, like, oh shit, this isn't me. It feels like me, but it is not me. And how we know is that, like there's a piece of evidence that you have. So in another video, I talked about how part of what when we reality test this stuff in our brain and it starts to loosen, like one of the ways that we can do it is say, like, okay, if you were if you were testifying and you would commit perjury if you lied or left out any evidence, would you say this, in front of the judge or whatever? And so it's like and so an example I used before, it's like, I am weak. Okay, if I was like my trauma tells me that I'm weak, my thinking is telling me I'm weak, my superego is telling me I'm weak. So that's me automatically being unblended and unfused, because I'm calling it for what it is. It's not who I am. I'm not saying I am weak. I'm saying my thinking, my brain, my internalized trauma voice is saying I'm weak. But I have evidence in my life where I wasn't weak. And so it's not 100% true. So here's something for you, like how you know that a part of you thinks that you're worthy is that you're still here. Like you think you're worthy enough to learn about trauma, or you wouldn't be here. You think you're there's a part of you that thinks you're worthy and deserving of healing, or you wouldn't be listening to the sound of my voice. So that is proof that a part of you is not fused with the superego. And so that's really good news. And all we want to do is continue to grow that part and decrease the part that's identified with the superego, or, again, the internalized trauma voice or inner critic or inner saboteur, whatever you want to call it. Um, so yeah, and that it's possible. It is actually possible. And um, it's one of the things I always recommend, like when we're in with other people, I'm obsessed with dynamics, and I'm just obsessed with them. And but it's really like it's an inner, that's why it's called internal family systems, like family dynamics, fascinating, work dynamics, fascinating. Like what are people doing? Like it's so uncanny when you do group counseling as the therapist or as somebody in the group, like it is like textbook how your issues come out. Like somebody will emerge, like when I went to treatment for my eating disorder in my 20s, and um there was somebody in the group who turned out to be my really good friend, but who would, anytime anybody would cry in the group, he would grab the tissues and hand it to them. And he got put on restriction from doing that because he was a fawn. And so he was always going to give. So you can know that that behavior he has about, I don't want you to suffer. I want you to have, or also please stop crying, because that could be a message from the Kleenex too. Like, I don't want to see your tears. Like, you know what I mean? So it's loaded in all sorts of ways. Like, let me take your suffering away, what it is that goes on in his life. And so that's why group counseling, it can be so beneficial, is because the shit will show up. And so, wherever you go, there you are. So, what was the point of that? So internal family systems. So the outer dynamics are one thing. Then we have this whole internal family system. Like we have all these internal dynamics. Like the other day, I'm working on dissociating less. I'm working on like not shutting down. And so I'm really like having to practice and put some energy toward actions lately. So as evidenced by me making this video. But I noticed that I started, like the molasses started to come. Like I was like, why don't you just sit down and relax? Like, why don't you just, I started to feel it. And normally I would, but what I noticed was, oh, you need to stop listening to this politics podcast, because my psyche was like, this is too hard. This is too upsetting. You can't hear this right now. And so I'm going to help you by activating the freeze trauma response. And I'm going to activate it so that you don't have to think about hard, bad things. And so once I saw that happening, because normally I would just become blended with the molasses. Yeah, I deserve to relax. I've done enough today. Yeah, I can shut this down. I might be fused with it. I might be blended with it. But in this moment, I noticed the dynamic of what was going on, and my unconscious need to make it stop. And a great, my wires are so like it's gonna. I've got a lot of work to do to kind of undo some of those synapses in my brain that just automatically like, oh, I'll help you out. I'll make you go to sleep. But it's not saying that to me. It's just doing it for me. As Jung said, complexes, we don't have complexes, complexes have us. And I just transfer that to like, we don't have trauma responses have us. And so once again, it's just another layer to less blame, less self-blame. You aren't a mistake. That's not a thing. That's real. Um, and that you can begin the work of unfusing from your superego. Like you get to have that chance. And I'm telling you, if you're watching this and listening to this, like you're already so rare. You're so rare. It's so magical. It's such a big deal because most people will always stay fused with the abuse. And then it just becomes self-abuse for the rest of your life. You know, it's like, I know this is cheesy, but like the calls coming from inside the house, like the abuse, we learned it, we learned how to survive it, and so we're living the consequences of what we learned and also how we survived it. And so that's for me, that's what like the lifelong journey of healing CPTSD is, you know, coming to my new truths. And again, you know, like the whole point of me doing any of the things that I do in my life is the intention is for me to be Elizabeth, for me to become a whole person, to me to be fully myself. And part of how I do that is I'm less super ego, I'm less blended with parts that, you know, aren't, you know, you know, I work to be less blended with parts that don't serve me, like I want to be served, that don't serve the purpose of me being fully myself. So, anyway, I hope that's helpful. And I really recommend this book from Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. P. Walker is a treasure. And this book is really, 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 really incredible. And we'll keep reading from it and keep learning and keep healing. Okay, hope that was helpful. Love you. Bye.